buy gold with dirty cash, take it through the system, sell the gold, get clean cash, give cash back to its owners, sometimes through their overseas accounts or shell companies, and repeat the process. If it sounds brilliant, that's because it is. But it's also illegal, and that's why Al Jazeera's 4-part investigative series on gold smuggling and the movement of illicit funds in Africa is making the headlines. The series revealed the existence of multiple gold smuggling networks in southern Africa that enable criminals to launder hundreds of millions of dollars, enriching themselves while ravaging their nations. The investigation, known as the Gold Mafia, highlights the inherent value of gold as a means of transforming illicit funds into seemingly legitimate, pristine money for those possessing significant amounts of unreported wealth. This process is facilitated through a convoluted network of counterfeit identities, fabricated documents, and yes, shell companies. The expose also uncovers the complicity of high-ranking officials from Zimbabwe in smuggling and money laundering, circumventing the detrimental impact of Western sanctions on the country. Now, that's our focus on the square today. I am Kamini Emmanuel. Thanks for coming along on the ride. Joining our gathering today are David Matsanga. He's an African affairs analyst based in London. A little later, we'll be joined by Ejike Okpa, who is also a global affairs analyst. But right now, let's talk to David. David, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, viewers, and thank you very much for inviting me on this crucial program this evening.
Yes. Now, we've seen the entire series in full, all 4-part. What are your key takeaways from it?
Hogwash. You know, the entire program, as you look at it, whose goal is it? Who is the complainant here? That is one thing that you have to say. You see, my sister, Zimbabwe is under sanctions. The gold belongs to the people of Zimbabwe. There is nowhere in the documentary that shows there is any criminality, because the people that themselves bought the gold, they have the papers from which allows them to import, export, and sell gold. So if there is anybody who is aggrieved, that person can straight away go and accuse the people in any court of law. But so far, the government of Zimbabwe has not said their gold got lost. The government of Zimbabwe has not said the gold was stolen. There is no report in Zimbabwe that shows gold was stolen or it is missing. So when you are looking at the story of Al Jazeera, it is purely a war between Qatar and the United Arab Emirates from the Gulf, who are bringing a war on the African continent, the two countries. I want to ask you one question, which I've asked everybody, that imagine this gold was sold to Qatar. Would Al Jazeera make a documentary? Because Al Jazeera is based in Doha. It is not based in Dubai. But if the gold was sold to Qatar, would Al Jazeera make a documentary? Where is it in the gold that it was said it was stolen gold? Every document, most of the people, I'm not defending anybody. If there is anyone who is culpable, can be found out by international law. But we are looking at the facts. If you are doing an investigative piece, I'm an investigative journalist myself, and I teach investigative journalists. One of the rules is to look for where can we help the world. But the documentary itself, my sister, talks about just a sensational report against the government of Zimbabwe because it is under sanctions, and therefore people will assume it has burst the sanctions. And it has made the world to believe that Zimbabwe has burst the sanctions by selling gold to anybody. This gold is available. Even you yourself, you can go to Zimbabwe and buy the gold if you have the papers, have the export license, and send the gold across and sell it, bring it back where.
So, Dr. Matsanga, I just want us to look at a few things that occurred in or that took place in the videos that we have seen. Starting off with the fact that perhaps the focus is not on the fact that gold has been stolen, but the fact that authorities didn't care to who they sold the gold to, where the money was coming from, and the fact that they could carry a lot of gold across the borders of Zimbabwe without anybody checking whether it's gone through due process.
First of all, my sister, in law, you first have to tell, it is not the people of Zimbabwe to check where the money was coming from. For example, if you have your money from Lagos in Nigeria, and then you say you have your money on a bank account in Lagos, and then you go to Zimbabwe, and then you want to buy gold, the Zimbabwe authorities will only do a due diligence to make sure that you are not a terrorist who is buying the gold. But once they find that you are a very good lady from Lagos who can buy the gold, you can certify the certificates, you have the import certificates of Nigerian government that allows you to take the gold, you know where to sell it, it's available. There is nothing wrong. The gold belongs to the people of Zimbabwe.
But
the Zimbabwe government has a right. It doesn't have a right to chase where did Madam X from Lagos came. He has stolen the money from who and who. That is not there. I don't see, I've never seen it in international trading. So the people who bought the gold is available in Zimbabwe. Nobody in Zimbabwe has made any claim at the police station anywhere that the gold was stolen. Therefore, the documentaries, all of them, the four, are showing some sensational information that everybody can pick in the meat and the joke and the pork joints of Zimbabwe, which we know very well. You can go to South Africa and find so many of these people telling you he has got 1 ton of gold waiting somewhere. Can you bring the money? These are things that happen like in a movie. This is a movie actually. Yes. And I had you while we are beginning. This supposed to be.
However, David, these people, including the ambassador at large, Prophet Angel, were told that this is money, illegal money, illicit money that they wanted to wash by buying gold from Zimbabwe. So yes, it was real gold, legal gold, but the money that was buying it was illicit. And still, there were elements within the Zimbabwean government who were ready to sell off their genuine gold to help people hide their illicit money. That is the problem.
Let's go back. If somebody is in Onitsha and he wants gold, he has his money, and he goes out in Ghana, he wants to buy gold. How will the government of Ghana find out if he stole or killed somebody in Onitsha to obtain the money? Apart from the records that are in the computer and the business permits that you have. That's one. This sensational story is bad reporting on Africa.
The difference is that
my sister, wait first. I'm telling you, it is the rivalry between Qatar and the United Arab Emirates that is coming up, playing us on international scene. The same rivalry is causing chaos, untold chaos in Sudan. The same rivalry is causing untold chaos in DRC Congo. The same rivalry is causing chaos in Somalia. These two countries from the Gulf state are causing us Africans and in Africa chaos. We are not saying there is no criminality. Let the police that international courts follow those whom they think have done money laundering. But as far as we are concerned, anybody who has gone to school will ask, who is the complainant of this gold? Whose gold is it?
Like
is it American gold? Is it United Arab Emirates gold? Is it Qatar's gold? Is it Nigerian gold?
At this point, it's difficult to tell because the gold,
it belongs to the people of Zimbabwe.
No, hold it. As we have learned from the documentary, once the gold gets to Dubai, it's then melted off and sold to other partners in Switzerland and in London. And so it's difficult to tell when the gold has been melted, remelted. When it gets to that point, it's difficult to tell. But that's not the point I want to make. So you find a lot of challenges or concerns with the Al Jazeera documentary because you think it doesn't provide any evidence of
exactly, and it will lose. In fact, the Zimbabwean government, President Mnangagwa should go to the courts in London to block this documentary. The government of Zimbabwe, the government of Zimbabwe should block this documentary. We don't want the Gulf states to spoil our African continent. They have come to Africa, they have been fighting there, they have been funding terrorists. They have now come in Africa to confuse us as African. As an African, I will not stand here to watch false journalism coming on African continent. They are investigating gold. No.
The government of Zimbabwe plans to investigate this matter. Are you saying that it's a wrong move for the government to take?
The government should investigate, yes. But the government has not said there is gold lost. What are you investigating? Is there any gold lost? What does my sister, what does the documentary tell us? Is it telling us to arrest Mr. Kamudeshi Party? Did it tell us whether we should arrest him? Kamudeshi Party is a Kenyan. Can we go to Kenya? Have they asked the Kenyans to arrest him? No. This is just a public relations exercise that was made to bring Zimbabwe because people heard that Emerson Mnangagwa has been called to go to United Kingdom at the coronation of Her Majesty the King. Two, they have seen that Zimbabwe is being brought back to the Commonwealth. That's why this dubious organization, Al Jazeera, has caused a lot of mishaps on the African continent. It is the type of journalism that has killed Africa. You have seen how many people in Somalia have died as a result of Qatar involvement in Somalia. We are near Somalia. Ugandan troops are in Somalia. We have died because of poor journalism that has been put on African continent. Anybody who has a complaint on this gold, whose gold is it? Answer that question for me, then we can proceed. I'm a lawyer. We can proceed.
So David, tell me, David, hold on. Tell me, what would you have liked to see in this documentary to make it strong enough as evidence of gold smuggling and money laundering in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and even Ghana by extension?
I missed one part of your question.
I'm asking, what would you have liked to see? What would have been the standard that you would have expected to see in this documentary for it to be evident enough that there is indeed some gold smuggling, some money laundering taking place?
Evidence. One, the source where they were selling the gold in Dubai. There is nobody who has been arrested. The companies in Dubai are still operating. The companies in London are still operating. Nobody has been arrested because there was no crime committed here. Two, until you bring me evidence that there is some gold that is lost in Zimbabwe, that someone went to Zimbabwe Republic Police and reported with a reference number that he had his gold, or people were killed and the gold was taken away, then we can have a criminal investigation into the matter. Other than that, I want the world and everybody to dismiss this as a PR exercise meant to bring chaos on the leadership of President Mnangagwa and the people of Zimbabwe who are jeering for a peaceful election that is coming in July. We are aware of the mercenaries of that nature, especially those who are in Doha, in Qatar, who deal with terrorists. Why doesn't Qatar tell us how many people died in the stadium? I want a documentary from Qatar that shows there were people who died in the stadium as they hosted the World Cup. That documentary would have a lot of opening. A country that does not have human rights record, a country where there is no elections, a television station in Doha, always molesting Africa, creating conflicts on African continent. We are not going to accept. And therefore, if there is any complainant of who took the gold, where the gold was stolen, whose gold was stolen, it is up to you to bring your evidence to the court. If I were President Mnangagwa, move to court in London, everywhere, block this documentary and give the Doha, Qatar,
Dr. Matsanga, I want us to take a break. Dr. Matsanga, if you can hear me, I want us to take a break. And then when we come back, let's talk about why you think that this could be an extension of the war between Qatar and the UAE. So stay with us here. We'll be right back. Welcome back on The Square. Today we are discussing the Gold Mafia documentary that unearths gold smuggling and money laundering in Zimbabwe. The conversation with Dr. David Matsanga has been very energetic and, not the way I thought it would go, but very interesting points that Dr. Matsanga is saying there. So, Dr. Matsanga, thank you so much for your patience here on the program. But let me take off from where you landed, right? You've made the point over and over again about the fact that because Al Jazeera is Qatar sponsored, and this could be an extension, this could be a sign of the differences between Qatar and the UAE. But what is there to gain here?
The gain is very simple. And ask yourself, my sister, if this gold was smuggled into Doha, Qatar, Al Jazeera would have not made a documentary. They would have been closed down. But because it is United Arab Emirates, that is where the gold went, the rivalry between Qatar and the United Arab Emirates is everywhere. It is in Libya. You go to Libya. You go to Sudan right now in Khartoum, how UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia have influenced the events to the generals fighting on the streets in there. You come to Democratic Republic of Congo, Qatar and Al Jazeera are used as satellite systems over Africa to create chaos in Africa. How come is this that Qatar knows every terrorist in the world? Can you tell me that Qatar knows every terrorist who works in the world? That every terrorist organization, Taliban, Chad rebels, Congo rebels, you want them to go to Qatar? Is Qatar a city for terrorism or what? We Africans, the Al-Shabaab, the uniforms that are worn by Al-Shabaab who come to kill us in East Africa and kill our Ugandan troops, is bought from those countries. They are bringing their fanatism on our continent. If this gold was sold to Qatar, it could have not have a documentary. Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, my dear sister, are not good friends. If you go to Qatar and talk about UAE, they will fight. And therefore that is what is happening. The gold belongs to the people of Zimbabwe. Period. Nobody in Zimbabwe has complained the gold was stolen.
So for the sake of argument, let's just say that that is the case. What I'm asking now is, what does Qatar stand to gain in painting Zimbabwe the way it has, or painting South Africa, its banks and some of its leaders the way it has exposed in this documentary? What does Qatar stand to gain with it?
It stands to gain because it is used by other foreign international states that hate Zimbabwe. United States of America does not like Zimbabwe. It has put sanctions on this small country called Zimbabwe. Some of us have been talking about these sanctions for a long time, and we are not going to relent until United States of America removes sanctions from this small country that has nothing to do with international terrorism. Whenever you see Qatar, you see France. Qatar went to Mozambique. You saw the war in Mozambique. Total Oil went to get oil. They sold the oil beads to Qatar. Whose interests are those? French. So Qatar is a bidder. It bids. It is one that rakes for Africa. They use it for money because France has no money. You can see France is bankrupt as we talk today. Everybody is on the streets wanting to burn it down. They depend on the French money, and therefore they put Qatar to go and look for trouble. I have asked one cardinal question to any journalist who can tell me if it was Qatar that was buying the so-called Mafia gold, would there be a documentary from Al Jazeera? Answer yes or no. Well, if you can answer that for me, I will be very happy.
I think that perhaps the argument would hold more water if the case was that indeed there is illicitly acquired gold going to Qatar, and the journalist of Al Jazeera failed to cover that and decided to cover that of Dubai, wouldn't it? Because if there is no illegal, some kind of money laundering involving Qatar going on, which we know, then why, so listen to me, why then do we make the comparison and ask whether or not Al Jazeera would cover the same with Qatar? Because the point I'm making is that if such a thing isn't going on, which we don't know at the moment, we can't make such an inference.
No, I can make a reference. When over 2,000 people died while building the stadium in Qatar, have you got the tape? Have you got the investigating documentary? Do you have it in your studio? Show us. We kept quiet, and the West kept quiet because of Qatar. But if it was another country in Africa with 2,000 people dying because building stadium and they were not paid, there is no compensation. How many, even Nigeria would be put on sanctions. So for us in Africa, we are watching the trend where Gulf states have come to destroy our continent. They have come to recolonize us, to take us as slaves again, as they did in those centuries. We in Uganda, for example, we are aware of the slave trade routes that took us all the way to the Middle East. Look at the treatment that these guys in the Middle East, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, how they treat our black people who go there to work, how they treat our women who go there to work. They treat them like dogs, and we are not going to keep quiet here. Also with Africa having the type of information that we have now, we shall hit them back with information of this nature.
I see.
Whose gold was it? Where was it stolen? Then you can say the gold was stolen, it was sent to United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and it was here. David, how can Qatar prove?
David, what we'll do is when we come back from this very brief break, just so that our next guest can join us, I want us to, if we put aside what you have said, just for 1 second, let's look at the content of the documentary and see if there's more Zimbabwe can do, or perhaps there's more Dubai could be doing to make sure that the washer is clear of illicit money. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Square. We're still discussing the Gold Mafia documentary that unearths gold smuggling and money laundering in Southern Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe. Now, you've seen David Matsanga. David Matsanga is an African affairs analyst, but now we are also joined in studio by Ejike Okpa, who is also a global affairs analyst. Ejike, you've missed such a fiery conversation I was having earlier with Dr. Matsanga, but I'd like to hear from you. Let's start from the beginning with you.
Yes.
What are your takeaways from that documentary? I'd like to know what you think.
Well, thank you for having me, especially live in the studio. I read that document, and it's just kind of a reminder of what has happened with Africa and the black race. From slavery. They came in here and they did what they did. They were able to do it because they were collaborating. There were Africans who were participating, equal opportunity participant. So what you see with the mineral, whether it's oil or the solid one, is also Africans enabling it. The gold thing in Zimbabwe wouldn't be going on without the Zimbabweans playing the part. And so it's very shameful. The only way that will stop is if the people who are entitled to the land or who have by nature inherited this, because they did nothing for the gold to be in the ground, to now come to terms and say this has to benefit us as opposed to the few that are doing it. So that's the only solution. The solution is not going to happen or come about expecting the people that are unduly benefiting from it to stop it. It's got to be the Zimbabweans, the Africans. It happens with the oil. It happens with everything that is African. Because Africans can go to any particular part of the world and do what other people do in Africa.
I see. But there are those, like David on the other side, who think that this documentary is to get at African leaders once again. This documentary is fashioned to cause mayhem in an African country, perhaps two of them. This time, South Africa has also been roped into this documentary. I wonder what you think about those who are positioned as such, because they say there's a lot of wrong that we've had going on in Qatar. We don't see Al Jazeera going to Qatar and saying that we want to investigate what's going on in Qatar. Why us?
Well, I think that could be an excuse. You look at Africa in the whole world. The continent of Africa is a place everybody thinks that they are entitled to. They don't have to be African. They just feel that they can come in here and get or do whatever they want. The question again is how many Africans have been able to go anywhere in the world and access the resources these other people can come to Africa. So it's not about exposing the African leaders. It's actually doing Africans a favor. Your condition is what it is because those who lead you have deliberately participated in minding your own well-being. I don't think anything is wrong with it, because our own media people don't have the resources or the interest to go do this stuff. I mean, Mobutu, what happened to Mobutu? Mobutu was known to have done a whole bunch of stuff. He built his own village. When he died, what happened? You go around Africa, all you see is these presidents or people who are associated with the presidents doing things that undermine the credibility of their own country.
I want us to look at reactions to the documentary, starting with the Zimbabwean government. In the beginning, when the first one came out, the Zimbabwean government had said, in fact, had barred people from discussing the documentary and barred the media from airing the documentary or any part of it. People had been threatened that their lives could be in danger if they discussed this documentary. Following that, we know when the second one came on, the Zimbabwean government then said that it was investigating or planning to investigate. We haven't heard anything since then. It's been 2 weeks. What do you think about how the government of Zimbabwe has responded to this? Does it tell you anything?
Well, it doesn't tell me anything except the reaction and the reactionary attitude about them being embarrassed, because nobody wants to be exposed for especially doing the bad stuff. And I mean, from the time Mugabe got there, in 1996, I went to Zimbabwe. The Zim dollar, which no longer exists, is one of the worst currencies in the world, or the only one. If you have one American dollar, you're entitled to like 3 or 4 of their money. So for 30-something years, it's wiped. Why? It's because of the conduct of the leadership of Mugabe himself, who was the president from 1980 when Zimbabwe became independent to whenever he passed away. During this time, the economy started going down. And why? Because of the way he was handling a natural resource. In economics, we look at natural resources as unearned income. There was nothing Zimbabweans or Nigerians did to have oil in the ground or anything. So you have to be very creative, innovative, to make those minerals work for the reputation of your country. We're not saying the president to be poor, but we don't want you to collaborate with foreign people who will not even do a fraction of what they do allow you to do a fraction of what they do in your country. In your country, what are we talking about here? Indians, Pakistanis, Lebanese. These people that they see Africa as where they can, where they can go in and put their anchor and get whatever they want. So Africans, when Al Jazeera do these things, because CNN probably not going to do it, BBC don't want to do it, because BBC is an institution of a colonial power. I don't know how much the Arabs done in colonizing Africa, but they play some role. So now they want to be a reputable media organization by exposing some of these things. I think it behooves the African leaders, if these things are false, show that it's false, as opposed to reacting and say, oh, don't talk about it. Don't shame us. You have exposed yourself to be shamed. And it's just a matter of who wants to tell the story. And they're telling the story of shame. And then we should now pull back and say, okay, enough of this. We got to get it right. Corruption exists in every nation, okay? But it's the amount of corruption and how that corruption goes to devalue the credibility and the citizenship of people that are being...
It's interesting that you mentioned that the Zimbabwean people would have to be speaking up for themselves. Now, one of the things that has happened is the fact that the Zimbabweans outside the country have demonstrated at both UAE embassies and Zimbabwe embassies, and I believe that was in London. But I also note that it would appear that there is not much seriousness attached to this entire gold mafia saga. Have you wondered why that is so? That, it would seem that Al Jazeera did the story and it's slowly going to die away. The international community is not interested in this gold, which ends up with them.
Well, you know what? The thing is, I can imagine when some years ago, maybe some decades ago, a lot of Africans were not educated, they were not citizens in some of these, if you want to describe them as first country. But now we have native Africans who are citizens in those countries, and then people who are second generation born of parents from these countries. Demonstration does not get you the result you want. You have to see what is the legal resources available to you to go after the institutions mentioned. They have Standard Bank, they mention some institution. The Zimbabweans who are in London, who are British citizens, can actually, bring a lawsuit in London against this institution and force their hands. But you just go into the embassy and demonstrating and carrying placards. The typical white man, I live with them in America, was okay, fine, what is going on? Until you sue them. I give you an example of what I'm doing. Back after Nigerian Civil War ended in 1970, the Igbos' money were taken and given 20 pounds to start life. In 2000, when I finished from Leadership Dallas, I decided I'm going to do something. So now we're looking at suing the institutions who collaborated with the Nigerian government to take this money from the Igbos. That's the only way you're going to get their attention, as opposed to just talking about it or going to the embassies and protesting. So we have to, the Africans who are outside of Africa can do the continent a big favor by taking advantage of the legal resources that some of these things, that are, actionable, and sue the company. You not sue the government because they have the sovereign immunity. But you could sue institutions and individuals, so you drag them to court. You could force their hands, to show your revenue, how, money is not air. Right. You can trace it. So the Zimbabweans are not, they are not forceful people. And so they're just going to talk about it and protest. Hopefully the president might call somebody who is the most noisemaker and say, hey, come home and do it.
I want us to talk about the president in a bit and whether or not he's complicit in this. But I want to go to Dr. Matsanga now. David, I know that you made your position clear on this documentary. What I want us to do, to ask you now, are there things of concern that took place in this documentary that you would want the Zimbabwean government to look at?
Yes, there are a number of factors that have come out. First of all, malicious document that came out. But first of all, let me welcome my brother here, Okpa. We have been struggling on this television for a long time. It is the first time that we are going to disagree on this matter. And I want to disagree with him on this, that I want to teach him about Zimbabwe and how Zimbabwe came to have sanctions leveled against them. There is only one man on planet Earth who has done the best thing in Africa, to get land and return it to his people, and that is Mugabe. Otherwise, land everywhere in Africa is very motive. Coming back to the question of the gold and why Zimbabwe is being added with South Africa. You are aware, Mr. Global Affairs man in the studio, that there is the question of BRICS, where Russia, India, China, South Africa is involved, and Brazil. Something is going on there. And this Jazeera is used as a satellite state. And I agree with you. We don't have enough resources as journalists on the African continent to go to Qatar to look for human rights. Qatar kills people every day. They cut people's hands. They did. We took our World Cup there and we were swindled a lot of money. We have 462 cases. Mr. Okpa should know I'm one of the few people in sub-Saharan Africa who has taken international agencies to court. You know very well about ICC. I am not a paper tiger. I am a real practical guy. Even as we speak now, I've taken this Qatar issue very seriously. And I'm filing an application in the court in London for Qatar to give me the evidence whose gold it is. It doesn't matter. But lessons learned out of this.
We're running out of time, and so
let me finish my point. Lessons learned out of this is the government of Zimbabwe is under sanctions that were imposed by America. The government of Zimbabwe has to be very careful to deal with people who come in that format. Two, there is nobody on us who has complained, because I'm a lawyer, who has complained that gold got lost. So until we get a complaint of stolen gold, the case cannot stand anywhere in court.
I see.
So therefore, I agree with my brother there that Zimbabweans in London are eating sausage. They don't know even how to file an application.
David, David, hold the rest of your thoughts for me. I'll just give Ejike the last few words here on the program today. I want us to talk about the president who was referred to a lot as number one in this documentary. Look, could this be people who were just exaggerating about how far their reach could be as criminals, so that they could get the money that was coming in from the investigative team, or really the president could be complicit in all of these things going on in his country?
All of that can be possible. But I think, this is a case of the accused or the allegation on the president to come out to prove that he's innocent. The reason probably why they are doing this is they know that most African leaders participate in doing things that naturally undermine their country. Okay, there are many examples of African leaders living like whatever it is they live, while their own people are suffering. So, but I'm just saying, if the president's name is mentioned as many times as is mentioned, and there are other individuals, let him come out and say, I don't have any hand in it. If the gold, you said the gold is coming from Zimbabwe, you could trace this. This is a solid mineral.
In a few seconds, could you tell me whether or not you think the international community should do more to determine where the gold is coming from and how it was got?
They should. But again, this gold does not just drop from there's a geography for it. Whether it's illegally being mined or it's been formally mined.
Right.
So why don't you, once it comes out of the ground, okay, you begin to trace it, you begin to know who is the buyer. And track it. Who is buying it.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid that would have to end our conversation here today. David Matsanga is an analyst who joined us from London. David, I appreciate your time and your insight on the subject matter. In the studio with me is Ejike Okpa. He's also a global affairs analyst. My name is Kemini Amano. I hope to see you sometime in the future. Bye-bye from me for now.